The train lurched to a halt at the dusty platform in Genoa, Nevada territory, and Teresa Emerson pressed her gloved hand against the cool window glass, watching through blurred eyes as strangers hurried past in the late afternoon sun of June 1867, each one oblivious to the terrified woman who had just traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man whose face she had seen only once in a faded photograph. She touched the bruise beneath her high collar, a parting gift from her stepfather 3 weeks ago when she had announced her intention to leave Boston. The yellowing mark served as a constant reminder of why she had answered the advertisement in the first place, why she had exchanged letters with a rancher named Kenneth Ellington for 4 months, and why she now sat trembling on this train, willing herself to step into a future that could not possibly be worse than the past she was fleeing. Teresa gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned, stepping down onto the platform with as much dignity as she could muster. The heat struck her immediately, so different from the humid summers of Massachusetts. This was a dry heat that seemed to pull moisture from her skin and made her heavy traveling dress feel like an iron cage. She scanned the platform for a tall man with dark hair and serious eyes, the description Kenneth had provided in his last letter. Miss Emerson. She turned to find a man approaching, and her breath caught. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking hazel, more green than brown in the afternoon light, and they held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered cowboy appearance. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, and she realized he was as anxious about this meeting as she was. "I am Teresa Emerson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Kenneth Ellington, madam." He stepped forward, reaching for her trunk. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she said carefully, studying him. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. But Teresa had learned long ago that a pleasant face could hide a cruel heart. Her stepfather had seemed charming to her mother right up until the wedding day. Kenneth loaded her trunk onto a sturdy wagon, then helped her up onto the seat with a hand that barely touched her elbow before withdrawing. That small gesture, that respect for her space, made something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. "My ranch is about 8 miles outside of town," he said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "It is not fancy, but it is comfortable. I have a woman from town, Mrs. Chen, who has been helping me prepare the house. She made up the spare bedroom for you." Teresa turned sharply to look at him. "The spare bedroom?" Kenneth's ears reddened slightly. "I figured you might want some time to adjust, Miss Emerson. We can have the wedding whenever you are ready. There is no rush on my account." She stared at him, uncertain whether to believe what she was hearing. His letters had been kind, almost formal, but she had assumed that was merely politeness. Every man she had ever known had proven to be something other than what he first appeared. "That is very considerate," she said finally, her hands gripping her carpet bag tightly in her lap. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon bouncing along the rutted road that led out of Genoa toward the sprawling valley beyond. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose in the distance, still wearing caps of snow despite the summer heat. The landscape was so vast and open compared to the cramped streets of Boston that Teresa felt almost dizzy looking at it. "I should tell you about the ranch," Kenneth said after a while, his voice gentle. "I have about 200 head of cattle, some horses. I employ 2 hands who live in the bunkhouse, good men named Samuel and Diego. There is also a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, as I mentioned. She is Chinese, widowed about 5 years back. Some folks in town give her trouble, but she is the hardest worker I have ever known, and she makes the best dumplings you have ever tasted." Teresa listened, trying to picture this life he was describing. "How long have you had the ranch?" "My father started it about 15 years ago. He passed 3 years back, left it to me. My mother died when I was young, just a boy really." He paused, and she heard something in his voice, an old grief carefully contained. "I have been running it alone since then. It is a good life, but it is lonely. That is why I placed the advertisement." "You want a companion," Teresa said, the words coming out more sharply than she intended. "I want a partner," Kenneth corrected gently. "Someone to build a life with. I am not looking for a servant or a—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. "I want what my parents had. They were true partners, equal in all things. That is what I am hoping for." Teresa wanted to believe him. Some small part of her, the part that still remembered being a girl before her father died and her mother remarried, wanted desperately to believe that such a thing was possible. But the larger part, the part that had learned harsh lessons over the past 8 years, knew better than to trust pretty words. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a sprawling property with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in distant fields, and she could see 2 men working near the barn. The house itself was painted white with green shutters, surrounded by a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was far nicer than she had expected. "Welcome home," Kenneth said softly, and there was such hope in his voice that Teresa felt a pang of guilt for her suspicious nature. A small woman with graying black hair came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "This must be Mrs. Chen." She smiled warmly as Kenneth helped Teresa down from the wagon. "This is Mrs. Chen," Kenneth said. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Teresa Emerson from Boston." "Welcome, welcome," Mrs. Chen said, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "I show you room. You must be very tired from journey." Teresa followed the older woman inside, relieved to escape Kenneth's watchful gaze for a moment. The house was clean and well-maintained, furnished simply but comfortably. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a large window overlooking the valley. A bed with a handmade quilt stood against one wall, and there was a dresser, a washstand, and even a small desk with a chair. "Mr. Kenneth, he very nervous about you coming," Mrs. Chen said, setting Teresa's carpetbag on the bed. "He good man, very kind, you see." "I am sure you are right," Teresa said politely, though she had no such certainty. Mrs. Chen studied her with sharp, knowing eyes. "You afraid? I understand, but give him chance. He not like other men." Teresa wondered how much this woman could see, whether her fear was written so plainly across her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Left alone, Teresa unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her brush, mirror, and the single book she owned on the dresser. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. At 23, she looked older, her blue eyes wary and her mouth set in a tight line. Her dark blonde hair was pinned back severely, and there were shadows under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. She had been pretty once, or so people had said. That was before 8 years of living under her stepfather's roof had taught her to make herself as invisible as possible, to never draw attention, to never give him a reason to notice her. Her mother had tried to protect her at first, but her mother had grown weaker each year, worn down by the man she had married, until she had passed away from influenza 2 years ago. After that, Teresa had been truly alone with him, enduring his temper and his fists until the day she had found Kenneth's advertisement in the newspaper. A knock on the door startled her from her dark thoughts. "Miss Emerson, Mrs. Chen has supper ready whenever you are." Kenneth's voice was soft, respectful. Teresa took a deep breath and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, having changed from his dusty traveling clothes into clean trousers and a simple shirt. His hair was damp, as if he had washed at the pump outside. "I will be right down," she said. Supper was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Mrs. Chen had prepared roasted chicken with potatoes and vegetables, followed by apple pie. Kenneth asked her polite questions about her journey and about Boston, careful not to pry too deeply. She answered briefly, offering little information about her life before this, and he seemed to sense her reticence and did not push. "Tomorrow I thought I could show you around the ranch if you like," he said as they finished their meal. "Or if you need more time to rest, that is fine too." "A tour would be nice," Teresa said. She would need to learn this place if she was going to live here, though the thought still felt surreal. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Teresa listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. Cattle lowed in the distance. The wind whispered through the eaves. It was so different from the city sound she was used to, and yet somehow more peaceful. She touched the bruise on her collarbone, feeling it fade under her fingers, and allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she had made the right choice. The next morning, Teresa woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She dressed quickly in her simpler day dress, pinning her hair back neatly, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Chen was at the stove and Kenneth sat at the table, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered and immediately stood. "Good morning, Miss Emerson. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you." She accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Chen poured for her and took a seat at the table. Breakfast was eggs and bacon with fresh bread, simple but delicious. Kenneth told her about the day's plans, explaining the layout of the ranch and the work that needed to be done. His two ranch hands, Samuel and Diego, would be heading out to check on the cattle in the northern pasture, but Kenneth would stay closer to home to show her around. After breakfast, he led her outside into the bright morning sunshine. The air was already warm, promising another hot day. He showed her the barn first, introducing her to his horses. There was a big bay gelding named Thunder that was his usual mount, a gentle mare named Daisy, and several others. "Do you ride?" Kenneth asked. "I have ridden, though not often," Teresa admitted. In the city, there was little opportunity. "Daisy would be perfect for you if you would like to learn properly. She is as gentle as they come." He reached up to stroke the mare's soft nose, and the horse nickered affectionately. Teresa noticed how tender he was with the animal, how patient. They walked through the property, and Kenneth explained the workings of the ranch, pointing out the different pastures, the vegetable garden that Mrs. Chen maintained, the chicken coop, and the various outbuildings. His pride in the place was evident in every word, but it was not a boastful pride. It was the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands and cared for it well. "I know this must all seem very strange to you," Kenneth said as they paused near a fence overlooking one of the pastures. "Coming all this way to a place you have never seen, to meet a man you do not know. I want you to know that I understand if you need time. I meant what I said yesterday. There is no pressure for anything to happen before you are ready." Teresa studied him, this man who was trying so hard to make her comfortable. "Why did you choose me? You must have received other responses to your advertisement." Kenneth was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on the fence rail. "I received several letters, yes, but yours was different. You were honest in it. You did not make grand promises or paint yourself as something you might not be. You simply told me you were looking for a fresh start, a new life far from Boston. That honesty meant something to me, and I thought maybe I could offer that to you. A fresh start." "You do not know what I am running from," Teresa said quietly. No, and I will not ask unless you choose to tell me, Kenneth replied. But I know something about trying to outrun the past. When my father died, this ranch was nearly bankrupt. He had made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. I spent 2 years working day and night to save it, to make it profitable again. There were times I wanted to give up, to sell it all and start over somewhere else. But I stayed, and I fought, and I made it work. We all have things we are trying to overcome, Miss Emerson. The question is whether we do it alone or whether we find someone to stand beside us. His words touched something deep in Teresa's chest, some long-buried part of her that remembered what it was like to hope. She found herself wanting to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the weight she had been carrying. But fear held her tongue. It was too soon. She did not know if she could trust him yet. "Thank you for understanding," she said instead. They walked back to the house in companionable silence. The two ranch hands, Samuel and Diego, returned for the midday meal, and Kenneth introduced them properly. Samuel was a weathered man in his 50s with kind blue eyes and a thick mustache. Diego was younger, perhaps 30, with dark hair and a ready smile. Both men tipped their hats respectfully to Teresa and welcomed her with warmth that seemed genuine. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Teresa helped Mrs. Chen with the household tasks, learning how to manage the ranch house. She had expected Kenneth to demand a wedding immediately, to exercise his rights as the man who had paid for her passage west. But he never did. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, giving her space while making it clear through small gestures that he cared about her comfort and well-being. He brought her wildflowers from the field one morning, setting them on the kitchen table with a shy smile. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, listening carefully to her thoughts, even though she knew little about cattle or horses. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, never lifted a hand in violence. And slowly, incrementally, Teresa felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. 2 weeks after her arrival, Kenneth taught her to ride properly. He saddled Daisy and his own horse, Thunder, and led both animals to the yard. Teresa wore a borrowed split skirt that Mrs. Chen had altered to fit her, more practical than her city dresses for riding. "The most important thing is to stay relaxed," Kenneth said, showing her how to position her feet in the stirrups and hold the reins. "Daisy can feel if you are tense and it makes her nervous. Just breathe and trust her. She knows what she is doing." He mounted Thunder with easy grace, and they set out at a slow walk across the property. Teresa felt awkward at first, too aware of every movement, but Kenneth was patient, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. As they rode, he told her stories about the ranch, about growing up here, about his parents. "My mother was from back east originally, like you," he said. "She came out here with her family when she was young, met my father at a dance in Carson City. She used to tell me that she fell in love with him the moment she saw him, but it took him 6 months to work up the courage to court her properly." "They were happy?" Teresa asked. "Very. He was lost when she died. I was only 8, but I remember how he seemed to fold in on himself for a while. But he had me to care for and the ranch to run, so he kept going. He taught me that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every day to put someone else's well-being alongside your own, to build something together." Teresa thought about those words as they rode. Love as a choice, as an action rather than just an emotion. It was a foreign concept to her. Her mother's second marriage had been born of desperation, not love, and Teresa had never seen anything resembling true partnership in that household. "What about you?" Kenneth asked. "What was your family like?" Teresa tensed, her hands tightening on the reins, and Daisy immediately felt it, tossing her head slightly. She forced herself to breathe, to relax as Kenneth had taught her. "My father died when I was 15, she said carefully. "My mother remarried a year later. He was not a kind man." Kenneth glanced at her, and she saw understanding flash in his eyes. He did not press for details, but his next words were soft with compassion. "I am sorry you experienced that." They rode in silence for a while, and Teresa felt something shift in her chest. She had told him something true about herself, something painful, and he had not minimized it or demanded to know more than she was ready to share. That small exchange felt like a test passed, though she had not consciously set one. Over the following weeks, Teresa found herself slowly unfurling like a flower after a long winter. Kenneth continued to treat her with gentleness and respect, never demanding more than she was willing to give. They took to spending evenings on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd and maybe raise some horses for sale. She found herself sharing small memories from her childhood, from before her father died, when life had been simpler and happier. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they sat on the porch as usual. The air was cooler now, a breeze coming down from the mountains, and Teresa had draped a shawl over her shoulders. Kenneth sat in the chair beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathing, far enough to preserve propriety. "May I ask you something?" he said quietly. Teresa tensed automatically but nodded. "The day you arrived, when I helped you down from the wagon, you flinched, and I have noticed you do that sometimes, when someone moves too quickly or raises their voice. I am not asking you to tell me what happened, but I want you to know something." He turned to face her, his hazel eyes serious in the fading light. "I will never hurt you, Teresa. Not with my hands, not with my words. I know you have no reason to believe me yet, but I hope that in time you will see it is true." Tears pricked at Teresa's eyes, surprising her. She had become so good at not crying, at holding everything inside, that the sudden surge of emotion caught her off guard. Kenneth saw the tears and immediately looked distressed. "I am sorry, I should not have said anything." "No," Teresa said, her voice thick. "No, I am glad you did, I am not used to." She trailed off, struggling to find the words. "Kenneth, my stepfather was a violent man. For 8 years I lived in fear of saying the wrong thing, of drawing his attention. My mother could not protect me, and after she died, it got worse. That is why I answered your advertisement. I had to get away, or I thought he might kill me." The words tumbled out, years of pain and fear spilling forth. Kenneth listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I wish you had never had to endure that," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "No one should have to live that way. But you were brave, Teresa. You found a way out. You took control of your own fate. That takes real courage." "I do not feel brave," she whispered. "I feel broken." Kenneth reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle. "You are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference." Something in Teresa's chest cracked wide open at those words, and she began to cry in earnest, great shaking sobs that she had held back for years. Kenneth squeezed her hand but did not try to pull her close, did not try to stop her tears. He simply sat with her while she wept, a steady presence in the darkness. After that night, things between them shifted. Teresa found herself seeking Kenneth out, wanting his company, missing him when he was working in the distant fields. He seemed to sense the change in her and reciprocated carefully, always letting her set the pace. He started sitting closer to her on the porch. He found excuses to touch her hand, her shoulder, brief contacts that sent warmth through her entire body. "Mrs. Chen noticed the change and smiled knowingly. "I tell you he good man," she said one morning as she and Teresa prepared lunch. "You start to see now, yes." "Yes," Teresa admitted. "I am starting to see." One afternoon in late July, Kenneth came to find Teresa in the garden where she was helping Mrs. Chen weed the vegetable beds. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously the same way he had the day they met. "Teresa, might I speak with you?" She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts, and followed him a little way from the house. He seemed anxious, and she felt an answering flutter in her own stomach. "I have been thinking," Kenneth began, then paused. "That is, I was hoping. Teresa, you have been here almost 2 months now. I know I said there was no rush, and I meant it. But I find myself hoping that perhaps you might be ready to consider. That is, would you be willing to marry me? Not because you have to, but because you want to." Teresa's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had given her space to heal, who had never once demanded anything of her. She thought about how she felt when she saw him coming in from the fields, how her day felt incomplete if they did not spend time together in the evening, how his laugh made her want to smile even when she was tired. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, Kenneth, I would like to marry you." The joy that lit his face was brighter than the summer sun. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. "You have made me very happy, Teresa. I promise I will spend my life trying to make you happy too." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony in Genoa, with Samuel, Diego, and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. The minister's wife played the organ, and Teresa wore a simple dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter from one of her mother's old gowns. Kenneth wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Teresa felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the front of the small church. The ceremony was brief, but when Kenneth slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Teresa felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. Kenneth leaned in to kiss her, gentle and sweet, and she kissed him back, no longer afraid. That night, Kenneth carried her over the threshold of the ranch house to the applause of their small household. Mrs. Chen had prepared a special dinner, and they ate and laughed together, toasting the new marriage with wine that Samuel had been saving for a special occasion. When it grew late and Mrs. Chen retired to her small cabin behind the main house, and Samuel and Diego returned to the bunkhouse, Kenneth led Teresa upstairs. She felt nervous as they reached the landing, old fears trying to resurface. But Kenneth must have sensed it. He stopped outside what had been his bedroom and took both her hands in his. "Teresa, we do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I can sleep in the spare room if you prefer." But Teresa shook her head. She had made her choice and she wanted this, wanted him. "No, I want to be with you." Kenneth drew her into the room and closed the door softly behind them. The next hours were a revelation to Teresa. Kenneth was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. He kissed away her tears when old memories threatened to surface, held her when she trembled, and showed her that physical intimacy could be something beautiful rather than something to be endured. By the time they finally lay together in the darkness, Teresa wrapped in Kenneth's arms, she felt truly married, truly his, in a way that had nothing to do with law or obligation and everything to do with love. "I love you," Kenneth whispered into her hair. "I think I have loved you since the day I saw you on that platform, looking so scared and so brave all at once." Teresa turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I love you too. I did not think I was capable of it anymore, but you showed me I was wrong." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time since her father had died, Teresa slept through the night without nightmares. The months that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. She threw herself into being a rancher's wife, learning everything she could about the cattle and the horses and the business of running the ranch. Kenneth was a patient teacher, and he seemed to delight in her interest in his work. They became true partners, just as he had hoped, discussing decisions together and working side by side whenever possible. The physical distance between them had completely dissolved. Kenneth was affectionate in ways Teresa had never experienced, always finding excuses to touch her, to pull her close, to steal kisses when they thought no one was watching. Mrs. Chen would shake her head at them and mutter in Chinese about newlyweds, but her smile showed she was pleased. Autumn came to the Nevada territory, painting the landscape in gold and orange. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, and there was a flurry of work to prepare for winter. Teresa learned to preserve food with Mrs. Chen, to mend saddles and tack, to keep the books for the ranch. She discovered she had a head for numbers, and began managing the financial side of the operation, freeing Kenneth to focus more on the physical work. In October, Teresa realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was simply the stress of the new life, but when another month passed, she began to suspect the truth. She waited until she was certain before telling Kenneth, catching him one evening after supper as they prepared for bed. "Kenneth, I have something to tell you." He looked up from where he was pulling off his boots, his expression immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I believe I am with child." For a moment, Kenneth simply stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his features. "Truly, I am fairly certain. I will need to see the doctor in town to be sure, but all the signs are there." Kenneth crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Teresa, you have made me the happiest man alive." The doctor in Genoa confirmed what Teresa already knew. She was indeed expecting, and the baby would likely arrive in late May or early June. Kenneth was impossibly gentle with her after that, treating her as if she were made of glass. She had to repeatedly tell him that she was not fragile, that she could still do her normal activities, but he could not seem to help himself. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold winds. Teresa spent more time indoors, working on the books and helping Mrs. Chen with indoor tasks. Kenneth and the ranch hands worked hard to keep the cattle fed and healthy through the harsh weather. It was a difficult season, but Teresa found she loved the coziness of being snowed in with her husband, the long evenings by the fire, the way Kenneth would read to her from books of poetry while she worked on sewing baby clothes. One particularly cold night in January, they lay in bed together, Kenneth's hand resting on Teresa's growing belly. The baby had started moving recently, small flutters that amazed them both. "Have you thought about names?" Kenneth asked. "Some. If it is a boy, I thought perhaps we could name him after your father." "What was his name?" "James," Kenneth said softly. "James Edward Ellington. But I would rather we chose something together, something that is just ours." They discussed possibilities, trying out different names, laughing at some of the more outlandish suggestions. Eventually, they settled on several they both liked, agreeing to wait until they met the baby to decide for certain. "Kenneth," Teresa said after a while, her voice serious, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I never properly thanked you for saving me, for giving me this life. I was so lost when I came here, so broken, and you put me back together piece by piece. You never pushed, never demanded. You just loved me until I remembered how to love back." Kenneth pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "You saved yourself, Teresa. You were the one who had the courage to leave, to start over. I just provided a safe place for you to land. And as for being broken, well, maybe we both were. Maybe we fixed each other." Teresa thought about that as she drifted off to sleep. Maybe that was what love was supposed to be. Two imperfect people helping each other become whole. Spring came slowly to the Nevada territory, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the muddy earth beneath. The cattle were moved back to higher pastures, and new calves were born. The ranch thrummed with life and activity. Teresa's belly grew round and heavy, and by May, she was uncomfortably large and eager for the baby to arrive. The doctor had warned her that first babies often came late, but Teresa's arrived right on schedule, a week into June. Her labor started in the early morning, waking her with strong contractions. Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, sending Diego racing to town for the doctor and setting up the bedroom for the birth. Kenneth was beside himself with worry, pacing the hallway outside while Teresa labored through the day. It was long and difficult, the pain unlike anything Teresa had experienced. But Mrs. Chen was a skilled midwife, having delivered many babies in her life, and she guided Teresa through it with calm efficiency. The doctor arrived in the late afternoon, and just as the sun was beginning to set, Teresa gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. "A boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Kenneth rushed in at the sound of the baby's cries, his face wild with relief and joy. The doctor placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in Teresa's arms, and she looked down at her son in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair like Kenneth's and was red-faced and angry about his abrupt entrance into the world. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Kenneth sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Teresa, and together they marveled at the tiny person they had created. After a while, Teresa looked up at her husband. "What do you think? Should we call him James after all?" Kenneth shook his head, his eyes never leaving his son's face. "No, I think we should call him Daniel, Daniel James Ellington." "Daniel," Teresa repeated, trying it out. "Yes. I think that is perfect." Little Daniel proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and eating heartily. Teresa healed quickly from the birth, and within a few weeks, she was back to helping with the ranch work, though now with a baby strapped to her chest or sleeping in a basket nearby. Kenneth was a doting father, constantly checking on his son, holding him whenever Teresa would allow it, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle and everything under the sun. Samuel and Diego were equally enamored with the baby, and Mrs. Chen declared him the most handsome infant she had ever seen. The little household that had formed around the ranch felt like a true family, bound together by affection and mutual respect rather than just employment. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Kenneth's careful management and Teresa's financial acumen combined to make the operation more successful than it had ever been. They were able to hire 2 more ranch hands, expand the herd, and even purchase some additional land from a neighbor who was retiring. Teresa found that she loved this life in a way she had never imagined possible. The wide open spaces that had once seemed so alien now felt like freedom. The hard work that filled each day gave her purpose and satisfaction. But most of all, the love she shared with Kenneth and their son filled a hole in her soul that she had thought would remain empty forever. On their second wedding anniversary, Kenneth surprised her with a picnic by the stream that ran through their property. Mrs. Chen watched Daniel for the afternoon, and Kenneth and Teresa rode out together to the spot where wildflowers grew thick along the bank. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Mrs. Chen had packed, talking and laughing in the warm summer sunshine. "You ever regret it?" Kenneth asked after a while. "Leaving Boston, coming all this way to marry a stranger, Teresa looked at her husband, this man who had shown her what love truly meant, and shook her head. Not for a single moment. You gave me a life, Kenneth. A real life. How could I regret that? I am the one who should be grateful, Kenneth said, reaching for her hand. You took a chance on me, trusted me when you had every reason not to trust any man. You made this house a home. You gave me a son. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. Teresa leaned in and kissed him, deep and sweet, and when they pulled apart, she saw tears shining in his eyes. What is it? She asked softly. I am just so grateful, he said. When I placed that advertisement, I was lonely and hoping to find someone to share my life with. But I never imagined I would find you, someone so strong, so smart, so perfect for me in every way. I am not perfect, Teresa said with a laugh. You are perfect for me, Kenneth insisted. That is all that matters. They stayed by the stream until evening, talking about their dreams for the future. Kenneth wanted to expand the horse breeding operation. Teresa wanted to start a small library in Genoa for the children in town. They talked about having more children, about growing old together on this land they both loved. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they rode back to the ranch side by side. Daniel was waiting on the porch with Mrs. Chen, and he toddled toward them on unsteady legs, calling Mama, Papa, in his high, clear voice. Kenneth swept him up into his arms, and Teresa wrapped her arms around both of them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The years passed in a blur of seasons. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals and following his father everywhere. When he was 3, Teresa became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Lucy. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, and their family felt complete. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management. Kenneth's reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher spread, and men came from all over looking for work. Samuel and Diego remained, becoming like family, both eventually marrying women from town and starting families of their own in cabins Kenneth built on the property. Mrs. Chen grew older but no less energetic, and she took great joy in spoiling Teresa's children, the way she had never been able to spoil grandchildren of her own. She taught Lucy to cook and showed the boys how to tend the garden, and she told them all stories about her childhood in China that had the children wide-eyed with wonder. Teresa found that the scars from her past, while not entirely gone, had faded to the point where they no longer ruled her life. She could think about her childhood in Boston without the crushing weight of pain. She had even found it in her heart to forgive her mother for not being strong enough to leave, understanding now how hard it was to escape a bad situation with nowhere to go. One fall evening when Daniel was 10, Lucy was 7, and Thomas was 5, the family gathered on the porch after supper as they often did. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out in the cool air. Teresa sat in her favorite chair with Kenneth beside her, his hand clasping hers. You remember the first night we sat here together? Kenneth asked. You were so skittish, so afraid. I remember, Teresa said. I thought you must be too good to be true. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to show your true colors. And instead you showed me that good men do exist, that love does not have to hurt, that I was worthy of kindness and respect. She turned to look at him, this man she had loved for 10 years now. There was gray at his temples and lines around his eyes, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. You healed me, Kenneth. You opened every door I had closed in my heart. Kenneth lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. We healed each other. And we built something beautiful in the process. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the sun set over the mountains they had come to love. The life they had built together was not perfect. There were hard times, difficult seasons, moments of struggle and doubt. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Teresa and Kenneth lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. Kenneth's arm was around her, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I am so grateful I found your advertisement that day in the paper," Teresa said softly. "It saved my life." "And answering it saved mine," Kenneth replied. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to truly live." Teresa lifted her head and kissed him, and in that kiss was 10 years of love and trust and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, she settled back against his chest with a contented sigh. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. The wind whispered through the eaves. Cattle lowed in the distance. All the sounds of the ranch at night that had once been so foreign to Teresa and were now the sweetest music she knew. This was home. This was family. This was love, real and true and lasting. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the rich tapestry of their life together. Daniel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Lucy inherited her mother's head for numbers and her father's way with horses, a unique combination that served her well. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a lawyer or a teacher. When Teresa turned 40, Kenneth threw her a party that brought together everyone from the ranch and half the town of Genoa. People came from miles around to celebrate the woman who had become known for her kindness and her business acumen. She had helped several other women escape bad situations back east, using her own story to offer hope and practical assistance. She had started that library she had dreamed of, and she volunteered to teach reading to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their age or background. Kenneth stood to give a toast at the party, his arm around Teresa's waist. 17 years ago, I placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride. I was hoping for a companion, someone to help ease the loneliness of ranch life. What I got was so much more than that. Teresa brought light into my life. She made me a better man, a better rancher, a better father. She took a guarded heart and trusted me to hold it gently, and I've tried every day since to be worthy of that trust. Happy birthday, my love. Here is to many more years together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. She looked around at the faces gathered there. Mrs. Chen, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever. Samuel and Diego with their wives and children. The ranch hands who had become like extended family. The friends they had made in town over the years. And most importantly, their 3 children, nearly grown now and ready to make their own marks on the world. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Thank you all for being part of our lives, for being part of this family we have built. And thank you, Kenneth, for seeing something worth saving in a scared woman on a train platform all those years ago. You gave me everything." That night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Kenneth and Teresa walked out to the porch, their favorite spot. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze brought the scent of sage from the nearby hills. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Boston?" Kenneth asked. Teresa shook her head. "Never. That life was not really living. This is living. Every day with you, with our children, working this land we love. This is the life I was meant for. I just had to travel 2,000 miles to find it." Kenneth pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady strength that had been her anchor for nearly 2 decades. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she replied. "Always and forever." They stood there together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen to love when it would have been easier to remain guarded and alone. The ranch sprawled around them, a testament to what they had built together. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the bunkhouses and cabins, their extended family rested. This was their kingdom, their little piece of heaven carved out of the wild Nevada landscape. The mail-order bride who had arrived with a heart locked tight against the world had found in her cowboy husband the key to every door she had closed. His patient love had healed wounds she thought were permanent. His gentle strength had taught her that she could trust again. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. As they turned to go inside, Teresa took one last look at the stars and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected love, for the courage to start over when everything seemed hopeless. For Kenneth, who had loved her when she could barely love herself, who had waited patiently for her to find her way back to wholeness. The door closed behind them, and the ranch settled into peaceful silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments of joy and struggle. But they would face it together as they always had, partners in every sense of the word. Inside, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, hands clasped, hearts intertwined. The story that had begun with a desperate woman fleeing a terrible past and a lonely rancher hoping for companionship had become something neither could have imagined. A love story for the ages, proof that the heart can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a leap of faith. As Teresa drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Kenneth's arms as she had been for 17 years, she thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Genoa so long ago. If she could speak to that version of herself, she would tell her not to be afraid, that everything was going to be all right. Better than all right. Wonderful. But that young woman could not have believed it, just as Teresa could not have believed it on that first day. Some things had to be experienced to be understood. Some doors could only be opened from the inside, even if it took someone else's love to find the key. Kenneth's breathing deepened as he fell asleep, and Teresa listened to it, that familiar rhythm that had lulled her to sleep thousands of times. This was her life now. This was her story, and it was beautiful beyond measure. The years that followed brought all the changes that time inevitably brings. The children grew into adults and began making their own ways in the world. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to be as skilled and thoughtful as his father. Lucy married a young lawyer from Carson City, who shared her love of horses and brought him to live at the ranch, where he helped manage the legal and business affairs of the growing operation. Thomas went east to university, studying law as he had always dreamed, though he came home every summer to help with the ranch work and reminded them all that Nevada would always be his home. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and the entire town of Genoa turned out for her funeral. Teresa wept as if she had lost her own mother, which in many ways she had. The older woman had been her guide and confidante, her teacher and friend, and the loss left a hole that could never be quite filled. Samuel and Diego both retired from active ranch work as they aged, but they remained on the property, helping with lighter tasks and serving as advisors to the younger generation of ranch hands. Their children grew up alongside Teresa and Kenneth's, and the bonds between the families were as strong as blood. Kenneth's hair turned silver, and his face became weathered from years in the sun, but his eyes remained as kind as ever, and his love for Teresa never wavered. Teresa herself aged gracefully, her dark blonde hair streaked with white, her figure a little rounder but still strong from years of hard work. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a grand celebration. Friends and family came from all over the Nevada territory and beyond. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and countless toasts to the couple who had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and partnership. Daniel stood to give a speech, his voice strong and clear. "My parents taught me what it means to love someone, not through words, but through actions. Every day, I watched my father treat my mother with respect and tenderness. Every day, I watched my mother support my father and stand beside him as an equal partner. They showed me and my siblings that marriage is not about one person being in charge. It is about two people choosing each other, again and again, through good times and bad. Thank you, Mama and Papa, for showing us the way." Lucy added her own words, speaking of how her mother had taught her that women could be strong and capable in any arena they chose, and how her father had never once suggested that her dreams were less important because she was a girl. Thomas, home from university, talked about the power of second chances and new beginnings, themes he knew had shaped his parents' story even if they had never shared all the details. When it was his turn to speak, Kenneth stood with Teresa at his side, his arm around her waist. 25 years ago, I was a lonely man with a failing ranch, hoping that a mail-order bride might ease my solitude. What I got was a partner who transformed my life in every possible way. Teresa brought intelligence, creativity, and business sense to our operation. She brought warmth and love to our home. She gave me 3 incredible children. But most of all, she gave me herself, her trust, which I know was not easy for her to give. Every day for 25 years, she has chosen to love me, and I have tried to be worthy of that choice. I hope we have many more years together, my darling, because I am not nearly done loving you yet." The party continued late into the night, and when it was finally over and the last guests had departed, Kenneth and Teresa stood once more on their beloved porch, looking out over the ranch that had been the backdrop for their love story. 25 years, Teresa mused. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Do you remember how frightened you were that first night we sat here? Kenneth asked. I remember. I could barely look at you. I was so sure you would turn out to be like him, like my stepfather. Kenneth pulled her closer. And now I cannot imagine my life without you. You are my home, Kenneth. Not this place as much as I love it. You. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. They kissed in the moonlight, and the kiss held 25 years of love and passion and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Kenneth took her hand. "Come to bed, my love. We have another 25 years to start planning." Teresa laughed and let him lead her inside, through the house they had made together, up the stairs they had climbed thousands of times, to the bedroom where they had shared so many nights. As they prepared for bed, moving in the comfortable synchronicity of long married couples, Teresa caught sight of herself in the mirror and smiled at what she saw. Not the frightened young woman who had arrived in Genoa so many years ago, but a woman who was confident, loved, and whole. The guarded heart she had brought with her had been transformed by Kenneth's patient love, opening bit by bit until it was fully his, just as his was fully hers. They climbed into bed, and Kenneth pulled her close as he always did, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. This was how they had slept for 25 years, and Teresa hoped they would sleep this way for 25 more. "Kenneth," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, love, thank you for unlocking the doors I had closed. Thank you for being patient with me, for loving me when I did not know how to love you back, for never giving up on me." Kenneth kissed the back of her neck gently. Thank you for being brave enough to open those doors, even though you were afraid. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for building this life with me." Teresa smiled in the darkness and let sleep claim her, feeling safe and loved in her husband's arms. Outside, the ranch was quiet under the stars. The cattle grazed peacefully in their pastures. The horses dozed in their stalls. The land they had worked so hard to nurture and protect stretched out around them, beautiful and wild and home. The story of the mail-order bride with a guarded heart and the cowboy who had loved her whole was not finished yet. There were more years to come, more challenges to face, more moments of joy and sorrow. There would be grandchildren to spoil and a legacy to pass down. There would be hard winters and dry summers, and all the unpredictability that came with ranch life. But whatever came, Kenneth and Teresa would face it together, side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart. The doors that had once been closed were not just unlocked but flung wide open, and love flowed freely through everyone. Their love story, born from an advertisement in a Boston newspaper and a desperate need for escape, had become something beautiful and enduring. It had proven that hearts could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, and that sometimes the greatest love stories began with the smallest act of faith. As dawn broke over the Nevada territory the next morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Kenneth and Teresa woke in each other's arms, ready to begin another day together. Another day of work and love, of challenges and triumphs, of building something that would last long after they were gone. The ranch would eventually pass to their children and their children's children, but the real legacy they left was not land or cattle or money. It was the example they set. That love, true love, was patient and kind, strong and enduring, capable of healing even the deepest wounds. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on that same porch in the evening light, their grandchildren playing in the yard, Kenneth would take Teresa's weathered hand in his and remind her of the day they met. How she had looked so small and frightened on that train platform. How he had been so nervous he could barely speak. How neither of them could have imagined what they were beginning. And Teresa would squeeze his hand and smile, that beautiful smile that still took his breath away even after so many years, and remind him that the best things in life were worth being scared for, worth taking a chance on, worth believing in even when belief seemed impossible. Their story was one of healing and hope, of love conquering fear, of two broken people becoming whole together. It was a testament to the power of gentleness, patience, and unwavering commitment. It proved that sometimes a guarded heart just needed the right person, the right kind of love, to unlock every door and let the light shine in. And they lived happily ever after, not in the fairy tale sense where everything was perfect, but in the real and beautiful sense of two imperfect people choosing to love each other perfectly, every single day for the rest of their lives. The end.